Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. Airports servicing international flights across the country were flooded with protesters yesterday.
Set them free! Set them free!
After visa and green card holders from the 7 predominantly Muslim countries named in President Trump's immigration ban were denied entry. Some incoming passengers were held for hours, but late last night, a federal judge issued a stay of deportation for legal immigrants already in the country or in transit. Around the world, several U.S. allies, including the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, condemned the action. Iran and Iraq, 2 of the countries affected, have suggested reciprocal actions against the United States. We begin with President Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, who joins us from the Roosevelt Room inside the White House. Good morning, Mr. Priebus. I want to start with the message this sends. This is the first move that Donald Trump has taken that has international implications. There's been a lot of reaction. Does he consider this a success in sending the America First message?
Absolutely. Look, yesterday what people need to understand is that 325,000 foreign travelers came into the United States. About 109 of those people were detained for further questioning because they came from the identified 7 countries that the Obama administration and both houses of Congress have identified as being countries that harbor and train terrorists. They were asked questions. The vast majority of all those people were released. About a couple dozen people remain for further questioning. And my suspicion is those people will move on as long as they're not dangerous. And it's perhaps a couple of them will be further detained because it's determined that they're dangerous for this country. So this was a promise that President Trump had made, and it's a promise that he's going to keep. And he's not willing to be wrong on this subject. We need to do our best to be vigilant and protect Americans.
Let me ask, there was another 170 so that were stopped before they ever got on planes, adding to your 100 number. Let me ask you about green card holders. There seems to be some confusion about people who have lawful permanent residence in the United States. Under this, our understanding is they will get extra scrutiny if they come from these 7 countries. Is that correct?
I think so. Here's what the correct statement is. The executive order itself is not placing further burdens on people that hold green cards, but what is reality, and this is the part that people get confused with, is that a Customs and Border Patrol agent does have pretty wide discretion in asking questions and making sure that the person coming in is not dangerous to Americans. And so what I'm trying to explain is that if you're a person that has a green card for whatever reason from Yemen, and you're coming back and forth to Yemen into JFK, I think it's reasonable to expect that a Customs and Border Patrol agent's going to have a few more questions for you to wonder why in the world, you keep coming back and forth from Yemen. Now, maybe it's no big deal, but it does mean that that person traveling back and forth from one of those countries is going to get a few more questions.
Let me ask you this. Apparently it may not have been in the executive order, but it's the directive from the White House that on a case-by-case basis, the Border Control agents do that. So it's not just their discretion. They're getting encouraged by the White House to do that. Let me ask you about this question of a Muslim ban. The president said it's not one. The president also said Christians will be prioritized. In putting out this executive order, did you check with the other Muslim countries the United States is allied with to anticipate the backlash you would get from this?
Well, but hang on a second. The order also says persecuted Muslims have priority as well. So, I mean, that's a piece that's just getting totally either, however you want to call it, misreported or not fully reported. It doesn't just say Christians. It also says persecuted Muslims get priority as well. So this is not a Muslim ban, John. This is identifying the 7 countries. And the reason we chose those 7 countries was those were the 7 countries that both the Congress and the Obama administration identified as being the 7 countries that were most identifiable with dangerous terrorism taking place in their country. Now, you can point to other countries that have similar problems, like Pakistan and others. Perhaps we need to take it further. But for now, immediate steps, pulling the Band-Aid off, is to do further vetting for people traveling in and out of those countries.
Let me ask
this
you
is an 80% issue, John.
Yeah. Well, let me just to get, when President Trump was interviewed by the Christian Broadcasting Network, the question was asked, do you see Christians as having a kind of priority here? The president said yes. So people aren't crazy to think that he's put a priority on Christians. But back to my central question. Did you touch base with the Secretary of State, any of the embassies in countries that would be affected or that would react to this, or to the ambassadors of those countries? Any outreach?
Listen, there was plenty of outreach that went on between the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security. We didn't just type this thing up in an office in the White House and sign it. There's been weeks of work going on. There's been a lot of communication happening. But the other thing is this. We're not going to advertise to the world that we're going to put a stop or at least a further vetting on travel in and out of our country from these 7 places. Some people have suggested, John, that, well, maybe we should have given everyone a 3-day warning. Well, that would just mean that a terrorist would just move up their travel plans by 3 days. Well, identifying too many people in these countries and giving them a heads up in these countries would only potentially flag the executive order for bad people.
I understand. I guess what I haven't heard you say is, yes, we reached out and let them know. But because here's why I asked. Secretary of Defense James Mattis, when asked about the Muslim ban that candidate Donald Trump talked about, here's what the Secretary of Defense said back then. He said, they think we've completely lost it. This kind of thing is causing us great damage right now, and it's sending shockwaves through this international system. Now, that was about something Donald Trump said in the campaign, but it touches on the reaction that has been to this executive order. That's the world that is out there now. And I just wonder, as we see a new president in action here, what efforts has he or anybody else in the administration taken in specific to deal with what is now being called a Muslim ban overseas? That's just the reality of the way things are. What anticipatory action was taken, or what action is being taken now?
Well, I mean, today, for example, the president has a call with leadership in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other countries around the world, and I'm sure this topic may come up. But the truth is, though, John, we have to protect Americans first. These are countries that harbor and train terrorists. These are countries that we want to know who's coming and going in and out of to prevent calamities from happening in this country. We are not willing to be wrong on this subject. President Trump is not willing to take chances on this subject. He was elected president in many respects because people knew that he was going to be tough on immigration from countries that harbor terrorists. And I can't imagine too many people out there watching this right now think it's unreasonable to ask a few more questions from Trump traveling in and out of Libya and Yemen before being let loose in the United States. And that's all this is.
Let's move on to Russia. I guess the question is, it doesn't seem like the administration did anything to kind of soften the blow of something it believes strongly in. Let's ask about
There's no reason to
here.
soften the blow. You need to pull the Band-Aid off, John, and start the process of protecting this country from another San Bernardino, which, by the way, was a person that did have a valid K-1 visa, which was a spousal visa, came into the country, and then ended up committing a horrific crime in Southern California.
And the husband was a U.S. citizen, right?
I would think, but she was on a K-1 visa, on a spousal visa. But again,
from which country?
That goes to your first question.
From one of the 7 countries?
Listen, well, then maybe you're right. Maybe we can expand the countries.
So you want
to
expand the countries? Will that be coming?
Just like the 2 people in Kentucky that were planning an attack in Kentucky, and the President Obama suspended that program for 6 months.
In 2011.
In 2011. The point is, though, valid visas are great, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be subjected to further questioning.
Sure.
That's all I'm saying.
I was just asking in the diplomacy question. Let's do diplomacy on Russia for a second. The president talked to President Vladimir Putin. Did any conversation about Russian efforts to meddle in the last election?
I'm not going to get into the contents line by line, John, on a secure call in the Oval Office. What I will tell you is that it was a positive call. It was a call where President Putin and President Trump talked about working together, number one, to eradicate ISIS and terrorism, to work together in resolving problems around the world, including Syria. There was nothing that wasn't positive about the call. It was an initial call. It was more of a congratulatory call. And it was exactly as the readout yesterday that came from our press shop said it was. And I think in the end, people should be encouraged by the fact that we're starting off on a decent footing with leaders around the world, including President Putin.
So I understand that means no sanctions were discussed either. Let me ask you a question about the border wall. There was some confusion this week about how it might be paid for. There was some talk about a 20% import tax. The response to that from both the left and the right is that that would essentially pass the cost on to American consumers. Can you straighten that out for us?
Yeah, I can straighten it out. There's no final conclusion on exactly how this wall is going to be paid for by the Mexican government. It can either be through a tax on goods coming across the border, could be through tax reform and a formula on import and export taxes and credits. It could be on drug cartels, and it could be on people that are coming here illegally and paying fines, or it could be, all of the above. There is a buffet of options that we have in order to pay for this wall. We need to pay for the wall. We will build the wall, and it's going to get done. And so we're at the beginning stages of this process. We've been in office now for about 7 or 8 days, and we've done an incredible amount. And I think that one thing that people can say about President Trump is he's following through on his promises, and I don't think people should be surprised that he's doing it. I'm kind of surprised that people are surprised that he's actually conducting himself exactly the way that he said he would, by being a man of action and protecting Americans.
Well, I think he's done a lot. People are just trying to figure out exactly what it all means and get it all straight. Mr. Priebus, we appreciate you being with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.